like many of you, I suspect, were inherently worried when the demo for Age of Calamity released and we learned that time travel would be a narrative tool in the newest entry into the Zelda series. The sheer notion that another timeline could exist was enough to make any devoted Zelda fan shake in their iron boots. But surprisingly enough, the story of Age of Calamity not only held true to Breath of the Wild, but provided an excellent alternative take on the events of the Great Calamity. While it isn't exactly the prequel I assumed it to be, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity told a story rich in detail and emotion that any fan of Breath of the Wild should take interest in. To understand the story of Age of Calamity, you really have to play Breath of the Wild, and if you're planning on getting Age of Calamity, then I'ma assume that you've played Breath of the Wild. It seems very strange for me to say this about a game that is technically a spin-off, but Age of Calamity's story was so good that I think it's far better than the original Breath of the Wild story. The entire time I played Age of Calamity, I was waiting for the moment I knew I wasn't gonna like it. The whole prospect of time travel made me very weary and nervous that the implications could alter Breath of the Wild or even the sequel. That moment never came. I view this game as if it and Breath of the Wild are two alternate endings to one game. Breath of the Wild being the bad ending where the Calamity succeeds, and Age of Calamity where the heroes are victorious and still gaining the way 100 years prior. My own preconceived notions that this would be the exact same story that we knew just fleshed out more couldn't have been more incorrect. The premise that this game's story takes place in a timeline all its own and has no real bearing on the original Breath of the Wild or the sequel, other than the time traveling characters knowing of what happened, makes this an extremely palatable experience. You can play this game with your guard down. There's no need to be cautious because at the end of the day, this game is self-contained. I do think it's silly that we have yet another timeline branch, but I've really grown to look at the timeline debate as something more up to interpretation than cold hard facts. Nintendo themselves have also said similar things, and it's the real reason they haven't committed Breath of the Wild to a timeline. The way I see it, the Zelda team gets to make really fun and different stories when they play with time in this way, so really it's a win for us the players because we get more games from it. On specific levels, Age of Calamity did what Breath of the Wild failed to do narratively. Not only did we get a lot of meaningful characters, but real character development as well. Zelda truly is the star of this game, and it makes me incredibly happy to see the long-snubbed princess get more screen time. Multiple times during my playthrough, I was left jaw-dropped. I had chills, I got emotional. Certain scenes in this game are incredibly powerful and have incredible meaning to them. Again, Zelda steals the show here too. Every time Terraco would play Zelda's Lullaby, I could feel my eyes getting misty. It's strange that this tiny little robot could have such a profound impact on me, but it's really more of how important this little guy was to Zelda and what he meant to her. I do love that Urbosa got a lot of screen time in this game as well. Urbosa, by a huge degree, is my favorite champion, and seeing her get all this extra screen time just solidified her as the best champion. We also got to see Master Koga and his new lackey, Suga. Every time Koga was on screen, I couldn't stop grinning. Ultimately, I think it was due to how excellent of a job his voice actor did. Both his and Suga's voice actors did a tremendously good job that it stands out above a lot of the other characters. Overall, the cast did an excellent job voice acting in this game. Obvious standouts like Rivali and Urbosa are a no-brainer that they'd be great, but the other characters, I did find a lot of times that some lines and deliveries sounded a bit off. Not a huge grievance by any means, and a lot of that could be due to the fact that these are characters they did years ago that didn't have a huge amount of dialogue to begin with. The new design for Calamity Ganon is amazing. It could be the hype for Breath of the Wild 2 or my own biased love for Ganondorf in general, but having a humanoid depiction of Ganon was something I felt was missing in Breath of the Wild. To have this giant bulking Goliath of Malice as the final boss not only looked menacing and scary, but was extremely cool compared to the discombobulated Frankenstein creature that was the original Calamity Ganon. The way Link and Ganon seal him in this game is just, oh god, so good. Overall, I love this story. What grievances I do have with it are few and far in between and weren't of enough magnitude to negatively affect the game to me. a lot of people are going to say that this game is fan service and nothing happens to the good guys. To which I would say, if that's what you want, that game already exists. It's called Breath of the Wild. While I have played Hyrule Warriors before, I wouldn't say it was a game I liked. I played the original for a very short time before dropping it, mainly because I wanted a Zelda game and it didn't feel very Zelda to me. With that context in mind, I'm still surprised at how much I enjoyed the same combat loop over the course of 20 hours. Having the option to swap between partners and completely change your playstyle was not only key in strategy, but essential in keeping me engaged in gameplay. For a game that boils down to hack and slash shield breaking simulator, it's incredibly challenging and diverse in combat. However, I do find the motion controls completely unusable. The sections of the game where you play as the Divine Beast were a slog to get through because I was dumb enough to choose motion controls. Do yourselves a favor, when you get to those parts, turn off the motion controls. Throughout the first half of the game, I found very little challenge in the enemies, but power scaling seems to skyrocket in the later stages. The Blood Moon mission in particular was incredibly frustrating. It felt awful to finally bust through and kill all these challenging enemies just for them to be resurrected not once, but twice. It didn't help with pacing either. The last few missions are very long and unrelenting, and in some cases, dying meant you lose a huge amount of progress. This part of the game was where I started to feel fatigue in the gameplay. Fighting in the tight corridors of Hyrule Castle against multiple boss enemies at a time, with the lock-on feature rarely going for the enemy I wanted, made me want to complete these missions solely so I could see the story instead of because it was a fun challenge. Parts of this game have very well balanced battles, and then some parts are just excruciatingly painful to get through. The combat is fun for a quick pickup game where you can mindlessly kill enemies, but for the story, be prepared to sink some time into some very difficult and unforgiving missions later on. The meme has long been that Breath of the Wild doesn't have good music. I don't know who needs to get their ears checked because it's got one of my favorite OSTs of any game. Sure, it isn't the grand sweeping orchestral pieces that we're used to, but that's where Age of Calamity comes in. In addition to the incredible new pieces written for this game, we got amazing new versions of classic Breath of the Wild themes. Some were slight subtle changes, while others were reworked to give them that Zelda gravitas that we're so used to. Regardless of the legacy this game leaves, one thing will stand the test of time, and that's that this game has fantastic music. Of course, it's no surprise to anyone that watches my channel that I'm going to recommend a Zelda game. But Age of Calamity is different. Age of Calamity isn't your typical Zelda game. What it really boils down to for Age of Calamity is if you enjoy the legend aspect of Zelda. The story is one of the most highly criticized facets of Breath of the Wild. So my question to you would be, what do you play Zelda for? If it's just gameplay, then this may not be the game for you. But if you love Zelda lore, you love the fantasy that this series offers, if you felt Breath of the Wild's story was lackluster, or even if you thought it was excellent, then Age of Calamity is a must-buy for you. Age of Calamity sets a precedent unlike any we've seen before in Zelda. Nintendo is actively looking at how they can tell stories of Hyrule through other avenues. This game may be a spin-off, but as far as we know, this tale is canon, and if you love this series, then it's my recommendation that you play Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity.